So today we're going to look at some great storytelling, or maybe not, in the beginning of a very well-known film from about maybe 10 years ago called Gone Girl, starring Ben Affleck, who, with Matt Damon, were from my hometown of Boston, Massachusetts, or that area. And he's a fine actor, and it was a very popular film. A lot of you, I'm sure, have seen it. It's currently playing on Netflix over here in Denmark, where I am right now. That's why I revisited it recently. But I think it's a good depiction on how to introduce a character, or not. And what I like to do in this series is, again, offer solutions if I actually disagree with how something is told. And that's important, because I think solutions are important. It's not just being critical, but in this particular introduction, it begins actually with with this woman lying in bed, a very pretty young woman, and somebody, it's obviously Ben Affleck's character, rubbing his hand through her hair while she's lying in bed, and there's a voiceover. So he's not talking to her, he's talking to us, right? And it's kind of gruesome and poetic. It's he says something along the lines of, "I often want to get inside my wife's head by cracking her skull open and seeing her brains spiral out on the pillow," or something like that. But it's kind of graphic, gruesome, and creepy in a way. And of course there's ominous music playing as well. But he talks a little more about her and their whatever dark relationship while she's, having her head rubbed. And then it cuts to, obviously later, and Ben Affleck's character, who I believe is called Nick Dunn. Names are important too. For me that's a little generic, a little private detective-y kind of name. But anyway, obviously names are important, as are titles of films. Gone Girl is a good title. It's based on a book. I think it's written by the author, actually, the screenplay as well, the movie. But so Nick Dunn is standing outside of his Midwestern suburbia McMansion, and there's a bunch of these McMansions, these huge houses that they're good at building in America in like cookie cutter neighborhoods. So there's like rows of them, and everybody's got 2 kids and 2 cars in the driveway and a dog and blah blah blah. So he's standing in front of his house. It's early in the morning. He's out by his trash cans or something, and he looks just kind of lost and tired. He's looking both ways, and then he just strolls back into his house. And then we go to him driving his big American SUV into downtown, wherever we are in Missouri, which is one of these classic old towns, the kind I like, with the fake facades and the old plumber and the barber are still there and stuff like that. And he pulls up in front of a place called The Bar and goes inside, and it's of course empty because it's like 9 o'clock in the morning, except for the bartender, who is his sister, we learn, Margot Dunn maybe, and he's bringing a game with him called Mastermind. And again, visuals are important when you're introducing characters and storytelling and all that. So just that he carries a prop called Mastermind, which I'm sure a lot of you have played. I played it when I was a kid. It's a Brainiac game, board game. And for me, again, solution-wise, it's a little bit over the top. It's certainly foreshadowing for what's going to happen, I guess. But, it's a throwaway. He brings it in and gives it to her, and she adds it to her collection of games behind the bar. And it turns out these two actually own the bar together. So that's their day job, so to speak. He's a writer, otherwise, we will learn as well. Like me and you, maybe. Storyteller. So they have some, funny banter between them. And the bartender, she's the same actor as the last season of, one of the women in the last season of White Lotus. Because I just saw it and I was like, I know her from somewhere. Yep, one of those things. These stars, they get to be all over the place. But anyway, so she's from White Lotus. But regardless, then while they're having this banter, and he actually orders a bourbon, which is important, because likability is actually kind of important, or empathy rather. If we can identify with a character that we want to follow, especially early on in the movie, it's sort of important. And he hasn't had a lot to offer yet. And certainly drinking bourbon at 9 in the morning is not offering a lot. It's kind of like, huh? What's wrong with this dude? But he's drinking bourbon. And then it cuts to a flashback. No, it actually cuts to this tool, and I'm not a big fan of tools either in films for storytelling purposes, but sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But the tool that they use here is there's this woman that we saw earlier with her hair getting, his fingers going through her hair. She's now doing a voiceover like he was during that sequence or that scene, and she's writing in a journal. So you see, her writing in a journal while saying or talking about what she's writing, basically, which is basically that I'm the craziest, wildest, what is it? I'm crazy happy today because I met a wonderful man, something like that, while she's writing with a pen with like a feather on the end or something, or a puffball. And it's a little more verbose than that, but she's writing something about that, about meeting a guy. And then it, of course, cuts immediately to her meeting this guy, which of course is Nick Dunn, aka Ben Affleck, at a party, kind of like a writer's party or something, kind of well-to-do upscale party in New York City, I believe. And it's a pretty long sequence. I think it's like 3 minutes where he literally hits on her. Okay, so it's they haven't met yet. He comes up behind her and makes some kind of suave comment, and they start going back and forth with this sort of suave intellectual banter. And again, for me, we got to jump right on it. We got to like a character or characters, one of these two, because these two are going to be in the movie the entire film, or maybe take turns, but these are the two lead characters, and neither of them so far has been even a minutia of appealing. Maybe it's the ominous music, maybe it's the ominous way they're both looking at each other, and probably for me it's the dialogue. The dialogue is so pretentious, and I cannot stand pretentious dialogue. I think it goes back to even before I went to film school, way back in the day in upstate New York. I went to Ithaca Film School. But I remember my final project, the final film I made, was a comedy, and one or two of the sequences were skewering, really some of my classmates who made these really pretentious films, because I hate pretension. Where, look at me, and I'm so intellectual and so poetic and so that kind of crap, or artistic. A lot of art films back then as well, and that's what I was making fun of. I think I had a picture of my roommate cracking an egg over a picture of two toddlers and talking about I don't know, Aristotle or something. It was actually very funny. My view on pretension at that age. But in this huge Hollywood movie, which is supposed to be not an art film or a pretentious film, it's super pretentious how they're talking. They're using lots of big words that I would almost have to look up regarding what they're seeing at this party. The other people, they're commenting on them in a sort of like cool bohemian style, but literally you could write down 5 or 6 words you might have to look up in the dictionary. And that's just, so they can trade banter that, they're both writers. We get it. They're both really smart and they're writers. And they don't really want to be in this party, because even though it's a party for two cool people, they are even too cool for too cool. So they got to go and get out of Dodge and get together. So he, talks her into leaving. So this is how he meets her. And it's literally like 3 or 4 minutes long. They go down in this old classic New York City loft elevator. She comments on his cleft chin, because Ben Affleck has a cleft chin, one of those cool things. And so he, it's sort of like throughout the movie, he has this thing where he puts his fingers like this and says, "Am I telling the truth or not?" or something like that. Some, thing between them. And that's fine. But they then, I think then they walk through the city a little bit and stumble by an alley where there's like an outdoor bakery or something, and that's where they kiss, because the bakery is blowing sugar mist over them or something like that. So he kisses her, and then smash cut, they're in bed together going at it, and pretty graphically. And I'm, again, not a big fan of both gratuitous violence and sex. I just leave it to the imagination. Imagine reading the book and for 2 pages they talk about sex or violence, for that matter. You wouldn't want to read it. Why do I want to see it? We have good imaginations, right? And that's what I'm trying to do right here in this little visual storytelling series that I'm doing with you guys, I'm trying to, let you visualize it. And I'm definitely not going to discuss that little sexual scene, for example, but it's just unnecessary in my book. People's private lives are private lives. Let them do what they do. If it's some particular weird fetish that we need to have in there for storytelling purposes, fine. But it's not going to make me more emotionally involved with their characters or the movie, for that matter, if I see them having, lengthy sex in various positions. It just doesn't do it for me. And, I think my rule, maybe I'm a prude, but if I was with my dad, who was a really straight and narrow, World War II veteran and executive, of a large company here in America, a really great guy, or my kid, my 10 or 14-year-old kid, let's just say, I was going to watch this movie with them, and again, there's some horrific violence or a lot of sex. Is it going to be comfortable to watch it? No. So why do that to people? To get your jollies? I don't get it. Anyway, I regress again, or I digress again. Back to the story. So after the gratuitous sex, which is a flashback, by the way, and that's another tool. So I was talking about tools before and solutions. I try to stay in the present, when I'm writing a screenplay or a story or telling a story, because it gets not only confusing when you start going back back in time, maybe forward in time, or it's distracting especially for the viewer, because it reminds them that they're in a movie. If you do a voiceover, because a voiceover is also a tool, and for me, it's just like, show the damn story in a proper narrative, a sequential narrative, so it moves forward, not all over the place. So you have to, put a puzzle together in your brain at the end and go like, wait, did this happen or that happen or wah, explosion. But they do a bit of that in this film, or try to anyway. But again, I'm not getting down on it yet anyway. Well, maybe I have been, but I would replace that whole sequence with all those pretentious words with something more heartfelt, because clearly what's happening here is, well, I won't say clearly what's happening here yet, because I'll just finish the little intro and then I'll go back to this, because then I'm doing a spoiler alert for my own introduction. So then it cuts back from the past to the present, where they're still at the bar, right? So this is kind of, just fades. I don't know if it's his brain that went into a flashback, or we just went to the flashback, I can't remember. But we go back to the bar where, where Nick Dunn is with his sister Margot Dunn, and they're continuing to have their banter. He's continuing to drink his bourbon, and now they do another 5 minutes or something of pretentious talk themselves. The woman is actually pretty good. I like her performance, and I normally love Ben Affleck. I think he's a fantastic actor normally, and a director, but in this one he's reserved, and obviously David Fincher, the director, has control of him, but that's okay. But still, there's yet to be anything empathetic. I've not found him appealing as far as wanting to follow this character and find out what's going to happen to him yet. And I'm pretty tough. I'm a tough audience, I know, but still. So he's sitting there at the bar with his sister at 9 o'clock in the morning, and they're playing the game Life. So not Mastermind, but Life. And he says, "What is life anyway?" And she says something about a Hasbro world. And again, ha 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 ha. And then, it just continues with them diverting into, I believe, talking about what presents he got for his wife. Oh, and it's also about he talks about his relationship with his wife. So, and it hasn't been great, I guess. They've been together, I think it's their 5th anniversary or something. And he's down there having bourbon, and he's, reminiscing for some reason with his sister about what presents they got. And it's these kind of strange presents, like she gave him a notebook. Oh, that's not pretentious. For his writing, his first year, he gave her a kite. And then, the 4th year, she took him down to the garden where there was a dead rose, and she gave him the dead rose, that kind of stuff, which would have driven me crazy when I was a film student at 21, by the way. But no, it's not driving me crazy now, just a little bit. But there we go. Again, don't waste our time. We have 2 hours of our precious lives that are being, used up to watch this creation. So we want to make sure it's you as the creator, David Fincher, want to make sure that, we get proper value out of our life in those 2 hours we got to watch your movie. Am I all over the place too? Maybe. So if you're not confused, these two are sitting at the bar and playing life and talking about these weird presents that he gave his wife or she gave him. And of course, it ends with something extremely visually graphic verbally that his sister says, which is completely unnecessary and would have embarrassed me in front of my dad and my teenage kid. Thank you very much, David Fincher, or the author. But, and again, I'm not a prude, but I'm just like, why? When she says that, go watch the friggin' movie. It's number 5, the last one. It's just like, nah, it's first of all not funny. It's not good dialogue. I wasn't rolling on the floor hearing it. It's supposed to be funny, maybe. It's not. It's stupid. Anyway, bad dialogue. And bad dialogue is a solution for that. Lose it, all right? Read it out loud. Does it work? Is it moving? Is it heartfelt? Is it funny? Does it create emotion? If it doesn't, lose it, right? Yeah. Anyway, we continue because the phone rings and in the bar, and Margot picks it up and says, "Oh, it's for you, brother Nick." So he takes the phone and she says, "It's Watchful Wally." I think she calls him literally Watchful Wally. And he's like, "Oh, hey, Wally. Oh, okay, I'll be right there." And he hangs up the phone and he runs out the door, right? And then we cut to him arriving back at his big McMansion in the McNeighborhood. And he waves at Wally, who is just an old man. Kind of funny. He's like a grubby old man reading a newspaper and smoking butts, like a Marlboro Red Dog or a cigarette, in front of his house, early in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning. But apparently, Nick's cat is out in the yard. And even though it's a huge, suburban neighborhood with no traffic and, a circle, or what's called a dead-end road with a circle at the end or whatever. There's no threat to the cat, but okay, the cat's out. Watchful Wally, that's his name, Watchful Wally. Tattletales, or calls rather, his neighbor at the bar and says, "Your cat's out." And so Nick runs home and finds the door ajar to his McMansion as he walks in with his big orange cat and waving at Watchful Wally, saying thank you. And when he walks in, he puts the cat down and looks over in the living room, and there's a table, like a glass table, turned upside down and shattered. And he's like, huh. And he's like, Ames? I think that's what he calls his wife, Amy. Ames? And there's no answer. And then I think we go back outside. Is like Watchful Wally's POV it is, and he's looking at the mansion of Nick, and he hears, Nick shouting inside, "Amy!" And then smash cut, the police arrive in this McMansion neighborhood, and two people get out, a woman detective and her partner, this guy, and they go inside, and Nick greets them at the door, and he's completely subdued. And, "Hi, how you doing?" And he goes, "Yeah," and they say something about like, "Oh, we hear there's an issue with your wife, maybe, possibly." And he's like, "Yeah, well, I just came home," and he points at the broken table in the living room, and he says, "Yeah, it's just kind of weird, I'm not the kind of guy to panic, but it's kind of strange. I don't know where my wife is." But he's, completely subdued, aka guilty. And not only that, remember, he's been drinking bourbon, which also doesn't make him, again, so likable at that time in the morning, especially because guess what? He drove home. Remember, Watchful Wally called, he drove home after a couple of bourbons. So the cops are, also kind of weirdly subdued. "Okay, well, do you mind if we look upstairs, in the bedroom or something?" So, "Yeah, sure, let's go upstairs." And he walks up the stairs, and it's just kind of surreal, again, actually very poorly written dialogue-wise anyway, scene, because I think the woman detective says something like, "So, what brings you to Missouri?" Or "Where are you from," rather. That's what the guy cop says, "Where are you from?" He goes, "Well, I'm from New York City, and I moved out here." And then the woman detective says, "Oh, why'd you move out here?" And he's like, "Well, my mom got sick." And she's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," as they walk up the stairs. And she goes, "How's your mom now?" And he goes, "She died." And she's like, "Oh, I'm really so sorry." It's just like this weird back and forth, with a smashed table downstairs. His wife is missing. He's not freaking out. He's acting weird. The cops are acting weird. The thing is definitely surreal. and does not feel reality based to me. It actually feels unrealistic because he, from what we know at least, should be freaking out. And if we are supposed to think he's guilty, yeah, he looks guilty, but why act guilty? So anyway, he goes upstairs in the house. It's a weird house. You know, they have a bedroom just for the cat, where the cat is. Like, instead of kid's room, it's a cat's room. And then we go into her office where the detective is getting a little bit nosy and starting to think there might be foul play. And she's putting little Post-it notes everywhere, and he's oblivious, or just kind of looking, why is she putting Post-it notes everywhere? Like on the wall where there's a fingerprint or a speck of blood or something. And then in his wife's office, there's all these, you know, diplomas on the wall and stuff. And then there's this poster of, what's it called? Amazing Amy. It's like a children's book character, like, you know, with drawings, and she's well known. She's like, oh my God, your wife isn't Amazing Amy, is she? Because there's like a picture of her wife next to it playing the cello or something like that. And she's like, oh, Nick is like, yep, that's my wife. She's amazing. She is Amazing Amy. And she's like, oh my gosh, I loved Amazing Amy when I was a kid. And then literally, I think we smash cut to another one of these frigging journal things where Amazing Amy is writing in the book, and now she's talking about Amazing fucking Amy is getting fucking married. And you know, and she's saying the F word a lot while she's writing in this journal. And then it's smash cuts again to this flashback where now Nick and her are a couple, of course, and they're arriving at this big party that apparently her parents had organized. And it's actually a faux wedding, because Amazing Amy, the character based on her childhood, is now getting married, because apparently her mom, who obviously is the author, I guess, of these books, has continued to write them up until she's grown up. So now she's getting married, even though the real Amy, or the fictional Amy in the movie also, is not getting married yet, because she's there with her boyfriend. And, you know, basically the actress, Amy, recounts her history, her life history, basically, growing up, how, yeah, she was a cello player at 10 years old, but then she quit. But Amazing Amy went on to be a child prodigy at cello. And then she played volleyball. There's a picture of like this drawing of this Amazing Amy character playing volleyball when she's like 12. And she's like, I quit volleyball when I was 12, but Amy, she went on to be on, you know, varsity volleyball team and win the state championships or something like that. And yeah, it continues like that with a few things, you know, that Amy, the childhood character, got to do that she didn't get to do in real life. Oh, like getting a dog also, you know. They gave her a dog to make her more humane or likable or something like that, which I never got a dog, and maybe that's why she's not likable. And again, just to be clear, the problem here so far is both of these characters, and again, both the main characters of the film, are not likable. They're not empathetic. We're not drawn into them. We're both, you know, for me anyway, it's kind of like, ew, you know, I don't like him. Definitely don't like her. She's really dark. Yeah, maybe it's interesting if it's like a spellbinder or thriller kind of thing, and we think he's guilty, and because he said he cracked her skull at the beginning, and then he's acting weird when the glass table is broken and the cops are like, you know, asking about his mom, and he's just like, oh, you know, and he's very casual and nonchalant about everything. It's weird, but it's, you know, we're supposed to, obviously, the manipulation is we're supposed to think that he's guilty of probably killing her at this point. But it doesn't feel that way. It actually feels pretty boring. And also, why do I want to follow these characters, especially if he did kill her, or, you know, what's really going to happen? It's not that big a reveal or surprise in my book. So at the end of that sequence, actually, again, it's another pretentious sequence where that we meet mom and dad, and the mom is horrific, of course, and, you know, it's all about the money. So Amy is fine with it because it pays her trust fund, and then she'll go sit with all these young journalists to discuss her life, compared to, I guess, the character that's based on her life, whose faux wedding she's at, the fake wedding for her, you know, again, Amazing Amy, the fictional character within the fictional movie. So she sits at this booth with Nick, her boyfriend, and he proposes to her in front of these journalists just to, do a hey, screw you to the journalists and her parents and everybody else. So she's really gonna get married at the same time as the fictional character or the childhood character based on her amazing Amy. So that's flashback number 2 of I don't know how many more, and we cut back to the cops leaving, I guess, or they have left, and now we're at the cops station where now Nick is getting swabbed or fingerprinted, or not fingerprinted, he's not in a mugshot, but he's definitely getting swabbed. It's kind of, he should be suspicious that he's a suspect, and he's still whatever, gee, this is weird. And he's making jokes, he's cracking jokes about ooh, I feel like I'm in an episode of Law and Order. Again, just kind of lame-o dialogue. I don't get it, because it's I think that's about 15 minutes into the film, and I still don't care. And that's a problem, you gotta grab your viewer, invite them into your story, and get it rolling. And I don't care if it's some super slow, cool drama. It's still, you gotta want to be there. And I didn't want to be there for any of it. And I guess that's that's where I'll leave this, because part of the reason I wanted to do this whole series of stuff for you guys is that to help you weave through all these multitudes of films that have been created over the years, and hopefully, for the most part, suggest that you watch the rest of the movie. And this is one that I really can't do that for, because I think that it's, again, our lives are incredibly short, and 2 hours is actually a long time, especially if you've ever been in those kind of end-of-life moments with somebody else. 2 hours is forever. You want those 2 hours back, right? And you won't get them back, so if you watch this movie, you won't get it back. And yeah, if you're curious, go watch it. It's built to be a big surprise reveal kind of movie, and for me, I think they didn't get there, and so it's revealed in the first 15 minutes that they're not going to get there because the characters are not built properly. So the whole setup, this whole creating fate that I often talk about, or not the serendipity, but the choreography, is poorly done. So all we've learned in the first 15 minutes is that Nick's wife, Amy, who's suffered through her life because she's had a childhood novel based on her life, has gone missing, and he doesn't really seem to care. The cops are curious and don't seem to care, but it's pretty clear that probably her husband has something to do with it because he's acting kind of weird, but that's about it. It's not like we're ooh, I love that watchful Wally character, or his sister who's just pouring bourbon at 9 o'clock in the morning at the bar. No, it's trying at best to watch, and that's not good in storytelling. Storytelling has got to move us along and give us something too, right? So I will stop there, but if you have any comments, if you disagree with me, absolutely put it in there. And if you have any films that you'd like me to look at, either challenging like the one we just talked about, or certainly great films, or sequences in films rather, and they have to be in the first half of the movie. I'm not going to look at any second halves of movies, but ones that involve great storytelling. And again, it's this concept of creating fate, moving us from point A to point B in a decent and realistic and compelling manner. That's what I like to see. Put it in the comments if you got that. Otherwise, I'll be back with something hopefully equally or more entertaining and hopefully equally helpful next time.